Welcome to the 2021 Bizcommunity series, celebrating diversity and inclusivity in the South African advertising industry, made possible by ACA, Association for Communication and Advertising. I'm your host, Rutendo Nyamuda, and today I'm honored to be speaking to this year's Loerie Grand Prix winners, Carl Willoughby, Executive Creative Director, TBWA, Hunt, Lascaris, and Sanele Ngubane, Creative Director at Toasted Samish, on a case study that really demonstrates the incredible value and the rewards that diversity and inclusive thinking can deliver. Welcome to you both. Carl and Sanele, your campaign Shwii for Nissan was awarded the Grand Prix at the Loerie Advertising Awards that took place recently. Were you expecting it, or was it a complete surprise?
Okay, I'll go first. Obviously, Loerie's, there's a process where they choose the Grand Prix, and I was a judge in the radio category, but even then, when they judge your work, they kick you out of the room. So no, it was totally unexpected. I actually thought it was gonna go to another piece, which was quite strong. That was as far as the local context is concerned, and I'm very glad that we managed to secure that.
And Carl, what was it for you? Was it a surprise, or was it something you were expecting?
We were actually, I was in Cape Town. I wasn't at the Loerie's ceremony, believe it or not. We were busy shooting, and I didn't know that we were going to win the Grand Prix. So when it was announced, I actually got a call from the business unit director on the business to tell me, oh, we've just won Grand Prix. And I was like, what? I didn't know this was happening. So it took me by surprise, but I was pretty excited about it.
Well, congratulations to you guys. It was such a fantastic campaign. Sanele, in the credits of the campaign, it says that the title is Ngola Yamalahle. What does that mean?
So basically, Ngola Yamalahle is a donkey cart. And it sounds like the actual word donkey cart makes. So in Ngola, you can hear the wheels, and Yamalahle, you can hear the charcoal. And that's basically the Zulu word for a donkey cart, Ngola Yamalahle. So the title of the ad is Donkey Cart Crossing.
And who came up with the name? Where did that come from?
Well, as we were writing the scripts, we obviously back and forth between I was writing the scripts, sharing them with Carl contributing what we could do to make this thing come to life. And as we were writing them, it was just the obvious choice to call these things by the idea. The fact that Zulu actually warns you in the word, it should have been reflected in everything, from what we name it, to the commands, to the radio that we did, to everything, every collateral.
And Carl, developing an app in an African vernacular sounds like a very complicated challenge. Can you share some of the process behind it? What did it take for you to pull off a Zulu app for a Japanese global brand?
Yeah, it's actually it was quite complicated. I think to go the conventional route would have been actually a bit impossible for us. So what we found was that if we hacked the system, found a hack in terms of the platform, it was easy for us to bypass the scale of developing something like this. So for example, to change the language preference would have cost us the equivalent of $75,000. It would only have been a short-term kind of period, I think for about 2 weeks or 2 months, I can't recall, but it would have been short-lived. The hack allowed us to get around all of that. So the hack was actually based off something on the Waze platform, which was a voice recorder facility. We figured out once we accessed the voice recorder facility, we could then create our own set of commands. So instead of creating an app and all the issues and costs that go around that, we could actually just hack the platform in a way that was respectful. So we didn't bypass any legal kind of boundaries, but it still allowed us to be able to own that, to own a shareable link, and then brand it, own it from a Nissan point of view.
And Sanele, for you, what was the process like? What details can you share with us from your perspective?
I don't know where you want me to start. I'll just do the summary. I think the process, obviously, this campaign had been in the pipeline for a long time. There was a lot of interest from obviously first TBWA, who we really like, got behind the campaign and managed to actually get it to go before we even sold it to client, before we even did anything. So the process there was basically sleepless nights trying to find things like, how do you get in for less than 75,000K? We don't have 75,000K. Nobody's paying for it, like, and then just reading with so I started reading the multilingual dictionary from page to page, and that then formed our dictionary that we were going to write our content out of. So and even now that's allowed us to do like the other languages and what have you, because we've almost got like our own dictionary of all these words that come from these sounds. So that was the first process of it, and then the second process, as Carl was saying, was then how do you get into Waze? There was some luck in that, because we actually did stumble on the voice recorder feature like after we had the meeting with Waze and whatever, and then you realize, oh, there's a voice recorder feature here, and then out of like the brainstorms, the main kind of back and forth with Kyle, why don't we just use that? Okay, like, can we fill in every word? Yes, we actually have a dictionary of words that we can fill in more than enough words. So I mean, AI, and then after 2 years it gave in. Was it 2 years, Carl? 2
years now, 2 years. Yeah, it was off the back of 2019.
Yeah, it gave it after 2 years. So yeah, persistence.
Wow. And was there a moment for either of you in this process where you stopped and thought to yourself, wow, we're really onto something big here?
I think for me, when we could see the full ecosystem of how everything worked, I think there was a bit of a slam dunk moment for me where we said, actually, we're delivering something that's for people who understand this language, who talk Zulu, but I think the inside around it was so powerful that we needed to find a way to make this come alive. We needed to make it happen in some form or another. And I have to say, hats off to Sanele and Tule, the team on it. I mean, Tule is not here, but for finding that hack, because without that hack, I think this would have been another obstacle in the way of Shwii happening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so yes, for you, what moment possibly stands out as that, pause moment of, oh my goodness, we're onto something big?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to phrase it another way, because I think Carl has answered it quite beautifully. Like, I love how we had so many moments of like, sure, this is never gonna work. There's too many barriers. Like, we've mentioned some of them, but like, like there were so many times where we could have just left it, like, and just like gave up on the first radio spots because it wasn't coming together. Because that's not how you do radio. You don't use a phone to record sound effects. Like, you don't enter that into CAN. And like, there is so many barriers. So for me, it's actually like just told me to push on maybe some ideas that are not even that great, but like it's given me that thing, like when the idea is strong enough, you need to persist, because there is something on the other side of that's worth a while. And I mean, what's less worthwhile than preserving our languages and trying to find a space for them in digital.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned barriers. You mentioned, that this also started on the back of like 2019. What would you say was the biggest obstacle and barrier and hurdle that you had to overcome?
The biggest one.
No, go for it, Sanele.
Yeah, sorry, I was sifting through all the barriers, trying to find the biggest one. I think the biggest one is always going to be like, obviously Nissan is a big global brand, and we're selling like, not just the language, we're selling a nuance, a really kind of like particular nuance of the language that actually even South Africans are like, could use a bit of refreshing on, like, so setting that, and you're saying them to like, it has to go in and get approved in Japan. Like, so that was probably the biggest barrier, which actually amazingly turned out to be one of the most beautiful days, because even the people who are approving it were like, we don't understand the word, but we love it. So intriguing. Yeah. And yeah, okay, yeah.
Fantastic. And Carl, you actually have a favorite Mandela quote as a key inspiration for the award-winning campaign. Can you share that with us?
Sure. I think it's something that's helped me quite a lot over the years. And I don't know how I stumbled across that, but he has a quote that says, that goes around, if you speak to a man in a language he understands, you speak to his mind. If you speak to a man in his own language, you speak to his heart. And I think the power of emotion for me, and I guess the power of emotion in advertising is far stronger than anything else. Obviously, there's reason and all that with decisions that we make. But when we can affect our audience emotionally, then that's pretty powerful. So for me, that quote is, I've used it in a number of presentations. It helps me sell relevant work. I stand by it.
That's so true, and such an impactful quote indeed. And Sanele, I guess, in addition to that, supporting that is ultimately what this case study demonstrates is that effective advertising needs to go deeper than just the demographic representation in advertising to be able to factor in more context and cultural relevance as well. And specifically for you, can you comment on this and how your agency works with language in general?
Oh, thank you for that. So, I mean, our system is very simple in that we are a home language writers. So what we mean by that is that traditionally, like advertising agencies will brief out translations agencies, like third-party suppliers for the languages, which then compromises sometimes the creative work of that, like the creative quality. So what we basically do, we go, okay, we'll start from the beginning, we'll work in the languages, we'll conceptualize in the languages, we'll stay for all 11 of your radio recordings, like all 11 languages, because it's important to make sure that the quality of those languages improves. How I like to describe it to like anyone like to understand is like, I go like, take a black doll and take Barbie. Like, if we can't push the level to Barbie or beyond with our own black dolls, and I'm just talking on a local context, like, sometimes it's like the hair is falling off, or like the skin color is too dark and the kid doesn't want to play with that. Like, if you can't push the same nuance, the same level of like, detail on our African languages. So, and I call them home languages, but for me, it's more like it's a cultural way of being, it's a cultural way of thinking. It's like a way of thinking, really. It's like, so yeah, and that's really it. It's just improving the quality of our languages, for communication purposes in whatever field that is.
Oh, that's absolutely amazing. And Carl, do you have anything to add on to that? I mean, looking at languages, celebrating languages, making sure that we're communicating, that the content that we're putting out there has that diversity that pretty much showcases or speaks to across the 11 official languages in our country and not always going back to English.
Yeah, I mean, there's a term I wasn't familiar with. What is it? Lingua franca, which is the language of use, official language of use in a country, right? I think the complexity is when you've got 11 official languages, then how do you communicate in a way that everyone understands? I think the thing that I wanted to say is that, and I saw like the Nissan is a tech brand, right? And I think using tech is something that we can kind of all connect with. But when tech starts excluding the language of the people, then that's a problem, because tech should enable and facilitate an easier, better way of doing things. But I think something that we spoke about in the case study is that AI is neglecting, the rise of AI tends to be in English only. It doesn't, so Siri and Alexa, only now, if you look at it, have a handful of languages that they use. So I think from an SA marketing point of view, we should be tapping into different people's languages, because if we don't, then we're alienating people. We're alienating an audience. We're starting to see communication on TV that's aimed at everyone that's in Zulu only. We're starting to see that. We should be doing more of that, because those are the people we're speaking to.
And I'm just going to stay on you, Carl, for a little bit, because statistically only 8.4% of South Africans actually speak language as a home or first language. So what are your thoughts on how agencies can actually start, making sure or actively, what can they actively start doing? Because what you run into is agencies outsourcing the bulk of their language requirements for campaigns. And at the end of the day, you're getting lost in translation. You're speaking to a company who's speaking to another company who's speaking to another company, and the communication gets lost along the way. So what are your thoughts on this, and how do we actually keep the bulk of the language requirements within the agencies?
It's a very big issue, to be honest with you. I think something that we're not as an industry getting right at a pace that is fast enough, in my opinion. And I say that with shame. I think the tradition, the norm, the convention is to take stuff and just outsource. And no disrespect to an outsourced company, but if you're not invested in the conceptual nature of the work, then what you're literally doing is translating, and you might as well take stuff and put it into Google Translate. But I think things get lost. There's a broken telephone thing that happens when you take it and you're literally asking for that to be translated. You need to conceptually translate things. You need to conceptualize stuff in the language. There's a different way of doing these things. We did, and Sanele was part of the team. Sanele, and you can attest to this, when we did City Lodge, we had an idea that was rich. This was 2 years ago, 2019. And Sanele came on board and he looked at it, and wasn't a translation. He conceptually translated it culturally into Zulu. And I think for us, what was great about that for the first time is that we actually won internationally at Cannes for Zulu in radio. So I think for me, the industry's got to realize, and I think it's starting to happen, and maybe there's discussions at Loerie's around, like, we have English and non-English, but from a South African point of view, our voice is becoming so much stronger. People look at us and they say, oh, these are people who are great at storytelling. We hear it in their audio, we see it. I think the SA industry needs to embrace that more. It's starting to happen, but I think there needs to be more of a celebration of that. I think agencies need to internally at the agency conceptualize in that language, not just take English and translate it. I think that's the challenge, and those are the tensions that we kind of deal with. And I think it's a big issue. It's a big issue with the industry. It's a big issue with our clients. I think clients see the merit of it. We see the merit of it. But making that happen is something that we're still trying to figure out. There is no perfect way of doing that.
Thank you for that, and very, very interesting points on there. Sanele, is there anything you want to add on there?
No. That is well put, Carl. This obviously is a frustrating, beautiful issue for me. like well put. It's like we could be so much better if agencies, and what it's created for me anyway is a third-party supplier. So there's nothing wrong with third-party suppliers, but it's in how you then treat these languages, which are going out to the majority of your customers, to be honest, in South Africa. So it's up to you. Do you want that message to be the strongest message that's coming out for your campaign, or is that just a watered down version of something else?
I think there's a lot of merit in selling something. We were just after the win. I did an interview with on 702, and Azania had heard one of the spots, and the response was visceral. The response was, I think the quote was, "It's delicious." I think that response for someone who hadn't experienced it and listened to it, who could appreciate the nuances in a way that a brand hasn't related to before, or to her maybe before. I think that's what we got to tap into. That's powerful stuff, So I think we got to do more of that, and brands can play a more powerful role in that,
Yeah, definitely, and certainly, and I think there is something beautiful about. As you're saying, hearing something in your own language, your home language, in your mother tongue, it stirs something very different in you. You respond very differently. It's almost like you feel at home, those moments. And being seen and being heard is really important. Of course. Sorry,
that's just one more thing. You also my daughter now just wanted to disturb us. It also is a one way for my daughter to know that I'm being serious. I switched to Zulu, and it's the same effect throughout. That's why we created Shwii, because Nissan warning words, once they say it in your language, you listen a bit more because that's in your DNA. So yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to add on that.
Oh, well, I really like that. It's very deep. You just, sometimes even if you don't fully understand, there's just that moment of, oh, yes, I felt that. I felt that. And of course, besides the two of you, is there anyone else who you feel should be specifically or specially acknowledged? Perhaps even the person who did the voiceover as well.
I love to acknowledge my partner, who actually just came to the party and did all the voices for Cindy Soapani, like, for the Shwii campaign, and started doing, like, the voices for the commands and the voices for just my daughter, and for everything else. And obviously my art director that I used to work with Tulengas, I think he did an amazing job visually.
Yeah, and I think I've got to say, because Sanele might not have mentioned it, but Sanele was the voice in the radio spots. So I think his delivery, his understanding of the language, we didn't want to use him because we were worried about his voice being known in certain circles, but Sanele was the voice. There are other people that I think we have, like, there's Mike Titilizi, Judy Subanda, there's Kim Hunt at the office, there's Louis Enslin, who, from a sound engineering point of view, is just made magic. There's a whole team back at the agency, from ops, Sonia Buerta. I can go on and on, but there's an entire Nissan team back at the agency, and then obviously the client that we super grateful for the opportunity. Without them, we can't make these things happen.
Earlier, you actually mentioned that we're not doing enough in the space, in the industry. What do you feel like this case study has done for perceptions around diversity and inclusivity in the country?
Yeah, I think from within the industry, I've what was great about this win was that people within the industry reached out and said, "Well done, that campaign spoke to me." So they happen to be in the industry, but I think as a whole, when you do work like this, people accept that we can celebrate this, that it's okay, and that we can shine with that. I think that's the role models, be it people or the work, through our work, we can give people something to go, okay, cool, that's okay, that's a North Star, that's what we can aspire to. So I think for me, we should be celebrating more of that. I think especially in the industry, we tend to, it was interesting, we tend to like, oh no, it's a good win, but whatever. But I think people really enjoyed this. People really celebrated this. Sanele, I think you and me, I think we got calls from other agencies where people went, geez, that was great, well done. And it wasn't because sometimes you're jealous of other people's work. We are a competitive industry, right? But people really celebrate this because it's for the industry as a whole. We're all competing when it comes to awards. We all kind of investing time and effort. But I think from a language perception point of view, I think people need the role of role models and examples. Case studies like this is very important, because we haven't got enough of that. It's not been celebrated enough. The more we do this, the more okay it is, the more we start changing perception, the more normal it becomes, and the more we can move on from the things that kind of hold us back, So I think it's very important. I think I'm grateful to have played a little part in that, but I think it's just the start.
And Carl, what would you want to see more of them? And if you're saying this is just the start, this is just, almost base camp, base point, base camp. What do you want to see more of? And what needs to be done so that we can see more of these kinds of things?
Yeah, I think what I've seen happen, and maybe, look, I was also in the radio jury. I wasn't able to influence this, just by the way. But what I did see was the use of language is strong, which is great. I think just using language isn't enough. When people come up with a brand name or product name, they say, okay, cool, we're going to put it in vernacular. That's not enough for me. I think the ability to use that language is one thing. But from within the creative industry, there's still an element of creativity that needs to come to the table. You can't just say to me, oh, I'm gonna tap into my home language, and that's enough. You've got to tap into your home language, and you've got to make it inspirational. You've got to add a layer of creativity that makes people go, oh, wow, that really spoke to me. Because otherwise, you're just going to blend in, right? Then we're just going to have a sea of the same vernacularness, if I can call it that. So I think what I'd like to see is that people come in and they use language, they use their cultural insights, which is, I believe, in South Africa, very rich. A country with 11 different languages, so many different cultures, is very rich. But I think we've got to use creativity to show that in its best way possible, so we can have more role models, we can have better examples. I think if we can get that right, then that's a very interesting, exciting space for us to play in.
Certainly, and indeed. And Sanele, coming back to you, I think, even around doing some of the research elements of it, as Carl's also mentioned, there is this balance between not just creating something in one's mother tongue or in vernacular, but finding this balance between maybe the cultural or conversational elements, specifically for the app, making sure that their basic app requirements or safety requirements that are met. There must have been a lot of almost balancing throughout this process. What did that look like for you in order to make this successful?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I think I love what Carl alluded to with, like, it's not enough to just say, I'm gonna translate this into the language, or I'm gonna just write this even in the language. And I think that's enough. That isn't enough, because you have to remember who you're competing with. For instance, if I just go on like our ways thing, we were competing against, like, there's a voice of a boy band. You can navigate in a boy band. You can like navigate in like in Batman. Like, so it has to be good enough to compete against that. But you can apply that on anything. You can apply it on, like, if I'm creating like a children's book, I'm competing against Peppa Pig. And that's a big kind of like, franchise that's going. It's a machine. Like, how do you use that creativity that comes from you thinking in your home languages to then just like come from like, this angle and hack into these spaces in a way where you stand out, because we have the standouts already. We just need to be in the right spaces. Like, yeah, I still maintain that. Yeah. Okay, cool.
Very, very interesting. And thank you for your insights on there. And I think, Carl, I guess as we just reach towards the end, I would say for you, in your opinion, what advice would you have for people who are entering the space, entering the industry at the moment? What advice could you possibly share with them?
I think often we try and conform to a space when we come into it. And I think people coming in need to realize that they can add value to that space. I think there are initiatives. There's the Blackboard initiatives that's trying to show advertising as an opportunity for a lot of South Africans, at school level, which I think is fantastic. But I think that when people come into the industry, they need to know that they can add value. There are things you have to learn, like anyone does. If you do a sport or you learn a new skill, you've got to learn the tricks to be able to kind of improve, right? So anyone coming in has to learn some of those tricks. They have to learn some of the creative stuff, the benchmark type stuff. They've got to do all that kind of creative fitness. But I think for people, they've got to acknowledge that they can add value to the industry. Clients pay us money to connect with an audience to sell products, right? If you understand that audience, and if you can relate to that audience culturally, then that makes you as a creative, or even on another end of the agency, valuable. So people need to realize that if you're speaking to a certain audience and you're part of that audience, or you have an understanding of multiple audiences, that you can add value. I think that is something that people need to acknowledge or know of. And then hard work, no pain, no gain. There's nothing like a quick, you can't leapfrog. You've got to put the hours in. I'm the worst with that. I'm very militant, but I believe you've got to pay your dues. You've got to sweat.
Certainly. Sanele, why are you laughing there? Have you experienced this?
I was waiting for like the truth in the end. I'm gonna work like a slave.
I mean, ultimately, you're competing. You're competing for jobs. You're competing for placements. You're competing with everyone who thinks that they're best in the industry. So ultimately, I think it's also finding that factor that makes you different and unique, and what are you bringing to the table. It's not just getting to the table. It's what are you going to do when you get to the table as well.
100%. And Sanele did this. I think the radio, there were different versions of the radio, of the audio. The approach to it was one way. I think we were all relatively happy, and then it changed, and I think Sanele found a way of making it better. The team found a way of making that better. So I think that's the kind of refinement and the sharpening that needs to happen. You can't just go, okay, here's an idea. Where's my recognition or acknowledgement? You've got to go, cool, here's an idea. How can I make it better? And how can you push it? And how can you streamline it and make it just simple? I think that's the challenge. So people need to understand that, but people need to know that they can add value. It's not It's not an industry that's not for you. The industry needs you. The industry needs people who understand the audiences. I think we don't have enough people.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And Sanele, what is it for you? I mean, Carl mentioned some really interesting things. And one thing, Carl, that you actually mentioned now was if something's not working, you're being able to pivot, being able to change direction, which, some people can be very stuck in their ways at some points. But Sanele, what is it for you? What advice do you have for newcomers in the industry? What roadmap or advice can you share with them?
Like that, your Zulu ideas are valid. Like that little spark that makes you get up that you can't explain is probably the most valid thing you'll ever say in an advertising agency meeting. Like I've walked into advertising agency meetings and said something that I didn't think makes sense, but and you shouldn't wait for the feedback, shouldn't wait for the validation. Like Carl said, I think now my lesson has been like, you gotta keep pushing. Like you said, they were happy with a certain radio spot, but I felt as a home language speaker, I need to get it to a certain level because I know what other home language content I'm competing with out there, and it's great. So you kind of have to almost, like your ideas are valid, set your own benchmarks before anyone sees you, they'll come find you. Like, I love it. Don't conform. I love what Carl said. Don't conform. You're here to add value. You're not here to fit into some box. And okay, cool.
Great. And one final question. You have successfully translated the app into Zulu. Which language is next? We're sitting on the edges of our seats wondering, is it my language? Which language do you have it next?
Wow, that's amazing. We've got three lined up. So we have got Tswana lined up already. And just correct me if I'm wrong, Carl, Pedi, and Xhosa.
Xhosa, yeah. We've already got English slang as hygiene, but Xhosa and Pedi and Tswana, that's correct.
And what's important to say about that is that it's not a translation of the Zulu idea. The Zulu is about warning words in Zulu because that fits a Zulu narrative. Xhosa is a different narrative. Pedi has to be a different narrative. It has to highlight the best things and the coolest things about that culture. So that's what we are doing without giving away too much.
Well, fantastic. And we're looking forward to seeing it in all 11 official languages in the coming years. No pressure, but thank you both so much for your time. And thank you both so much for your insights. This has been a fantastic discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rutendo.
Thank you so much, Rutendo.
Thank you to our amazing guests. And thank you all for joining us for Bizcommunity's industry-wide initiative, celebrating these important conversations around diversity and inclusivity in the South African advertising industry, made possible by the generous support of the ACA, Association for Communication and Advertising.